about ready to start, if we could all just kind of mill on in and take a seat.
I assume you all got the joke. That's what we call setting the tone. All right, welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming. I think we're going to throw up a thank you slide here in a second. A lot of people in this room, a lot of people not in this room that are stuck by snow and sleet and wind and all that helped put this together. As we know, Chuck was a people person, was part of a community of friends, of pilots, of airport people, of family, of everything. And we miss him dearly. So today we want to do honors, and these people are just some of the people that helped put this together. I think I'm going to start off the official way by reading kind of a bit of Wikipedia, because Chuck did a lot of stuff. So when we were researching this, right, you go into AI and say, hey, who was Chuck Coleman again? Like, fill all this stuff in, because he had all these little, pockets in his life where even though you're really close to him, he had these other things. You hear he was off on adventures, so you get little bits and pieces, but you really had to dig and figure out, when did he get his pilot's license? When did he learn to drive? What was it like as a kid? So today we're going to really expose you to the inside Chuck. I'll start off with the formal thing. Charles Thomas Coleman was an American aviator, aerospace engineer, airshow and test pilot. He worked as a design and performance engineer for several aircraft corporations, such as McDonnell Douglas, BD Jet Corporation, Visionaire, Scale Composites, Spaceship Company. He was a member of the Experimental Society of Test Pilots, served on the board of directors at Mojave Air Spaceport, and he was a commercial test and instructor pilot. He logged more than 10,800 hours in the airplane. So that's Wikipedia. But we're here to celebrate behind the scenes Chuck that we knew and loved. Our son, our brother, our friend, our coworker, cohort, adventurer, pioneer, comedian, and inspiration to so many that knew him. There's a quote I think we've all heard, but I think it does describe Chuck very well. Life is not a journey to the grave with the intention of arriving safely in a pretty and well-preserved body, but rather to skin and broadside, thoroughly used up, totally worn out, and loudly proclaiming, wow, what a ride. That to me is Chuck. To me, I think we're here today to celebrate the kid from Michigan who chastely succeeded in living his dreams, not once, and we'll talk about this, but twice. The guy that worked on many record-breaking airplanes as a team member, not a sole contributor. Who could build anything that he designed, not only at work, but also in his basement at his house in St. Louis, or here in a hangar in Mojave. We're here to celebrate a guy who loved his Wolverines. We'll talk about that later, I'm sure, as I can tell by the big M's on the road here. A guy that got every pilot rating he could, to the point he ran out of them, and then he started jumping out of perfectly good airplanes just to figure out what it was like to fly from the other side. For the last 20 years, at least my portion of this friendship here was in Mojave, and he's been a constant. The reason I scooted up is because whether he was checking in, scooting around from hangar to hangar, telling small stories, or whether he heard the roar of the extra 300 engine overhead, he was always here. And usually on a day like today, he was scooting around, or he was sitting next to a hangar with a bunch of newbies who'd never been in an airplane before, and he was taking somebody who'd never experienced seeing the airplane, or the world upside down from an airplane for a ride. So whether you knew him as Charles Thomas Coleman, when he was in trouble, that's his mom right there in the front, in case you didn't catch that, or Chuck, or as I believe it was Cody, where's Cody? Cody Chandler, who was a young IT kid, started calling him Hey Chucky C, as he's been known in Mojave ever since. We all fill a huge vacuum where Chuck seemingly was just minutes ago. I'm sure if you're like me, you're waiting for him to walk in the door with that mischievous grin to tell you something about stocks or a weird thing about football or just some funny, quippy thing that he was into that week. So today we paused on our Chuck in a way I think he would have loved by making up stories, telling tall tales, and talking about the adventures. So getting back to that, he was a very compartmentalized, as we know, engineer. Classic test pilot engineer where he could break his life into these buckets. So when you were with him, it was like you were with him in whatever adventure you were on right now. Even though last week he was off doing whatever he was doing, climbing mountains or aerobatics or Top Gun stuff, he didn't spew that at you. It was like he was with you in the moment and you were on your adventure. So today we're here behind the scenes, and a bunch of people in this room will tell stories. And at the end, in fact, we'll open it up. You can all tell whatever stories you want. And we'll see what it was like from the other side. So we're going to do that by kind of going through the seasons of Chuck's life. So to start, I'm going to start with the early part. And so I asked his mom, Joanne, up here in front, and his sister, Susan, if they had any words to say. And they have a really close friend from Michigan, Janet Anderson, who's, I think, grown up with them, been around family friends. And she's going to say a few words from the family.
Good morning. On behalf of Chuck's mom, Joanne, and sister, Susan, I'm honored to present these memories from Chuck's early years. Chuck made his entrance into our world on June 26, 1963, at 3:51 p.m. in Kalamazoo, Michigan. He came in hot. He came in so hot that he broke his mother's tailbone on the way. It was a hard landing. Hard landings became a reoccurring theme throughout his life. His family moved to Milford, Michigan a few years later. Their home was a guest house on a sprawling farm where racehorses were bred. His father, Tom, was a civil engineer for the Department of Transportation. His mother, Joanne, was a registered nurse and homemaker. His sister, Susan, was crushing it in kindergarten, and Chuck fell down the second floor flight of stairs on the first day in their new house. Once again, a hard landing. But he bounced back up and walked away like nothing had happened. Chuck's love of hiking began on that horse farm when he was 4 years old. He would pack a peanut butter sandwich in his leather satchel, fill a canteen with Kool-Aid, pull on his cowboy boots, and hike the quarter-mile through the tall grass field to the next property and back. His mother watched his little cowboy hat bob through the grass and knew he was safe. The family moved to St. John's, Michigan, the summer before Chuck began kindergarten. School was easy for him. He learned to read and write and do math quickly. He finished his assignments before everyone else in his class. He memorized all 7 versions of the song, Puff the Magic Dragon. But then one day, a letter of concern arrived from his teacher. Chuck could not skip. But after some coaching and practice, he mastered the art of skipping. This was just the beginning of what he would learn to master in the coming years. Chuck taught himself to type on a manual typewriter around age 8. He did not write a novel, but he did curate very long and detailed wish lists for Santa. He scoured the Sears and Montgomery Ward catalogs and helpfully typed out each item's page number, catalog order code, description, and price. Single-spaced. His love of shopping had begun. Chuck loved chemistry and memorized all of the elements in the periodic table. He received a chemistry set for Christmas one year and set up a lab in the basement. Fortunately, he did not blow up the house, but seeing him in his kid-sized goggles and gas mask was often startling. Chuck's first time flying on an airplane was in 1975 at 12 years old. He flew from Michigan to LAX in California and received his first pair of wings from the pilot. His love of flying and of California had begun. Chuck loved sports, games, and music. He excelled on the high school tennis team and won first place in the Greater Lansing Tennis Open, competing against men of all ages. He played on the football team. He competed in wrestling. He was the pitcher for his little league team, the Twins. He competed in the soapbox derby. He loved to skateboard and ride his bike. He played trumpet in the band and had a vinyl record collection. He designed bridges out of matchsticks and popsicle sticks and was the last bridge standing in competition. He played chess against people of all ages. He liked to compete, loved to win, and was a sore loser during those occasions when he was outmatched. He was a top 10 student in his graduating class, but thought that technically he should be first because the other kids took easier classes. His dream from a very young age was to attend the University of Michigan, and he made that dream a reality. Chuck's mother and sister are devastated by his loss and forever changed. They vividly remember his extreme hard landing in August of 2008. He was not expected to recover, but with lots of help and hard work, he lived and thrived for another 16 years. They remember the good times they had together, as well as their differences and quarrels. He had plans and projects that he was looking forward to, and they grieve for what will never be. They know that he lived on the razor's edge and had a very full life. They are so very proud and happy that he touched so many lives. Chuck's story has ended, but he will forever be remembered. In closing, I would like to share a little something. I found a letter Chuck had written after the loss of Mike Ellsbury. He said that he knew they would fly again together someday, and it would be in a really cool plane. And I imagine that's exactly what he's doing today. In closing, I would like to thank everyone for coming and for the part you played in Chuck's journey in life. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. I'm not going to stand up here and pretend I know what it's like to be a Michigan college graduate. But there are a bunch of folks in the front row, again, probably scattered throughout here, who are friends with Chuck's. Had a great relationship with him 40 years later. So I'm going to bring up John Tobin. So Chuck graduated high school, went to the University of Michigan, where he graduated in 1985 with a Bachelor of Science in Aerospace and Mechanical Engineering. As a young kid, he had friends, but he didn't have those kind of lifelong besties, as the kids call them now. But these guys are definitely besties, and they took Chuck under their wing in college. So, John?
Thanks. So, just like my buddies over here, we all stumbled in the University of Michigan, 18 years old, really just starting to form the person that we would become. And very early we meet Chuck. And it was pretty clear to anyone right off the bat that you didn't have to ask what major Chuck was. Chuck was an engineer. It was pretty clear that Chuck was an engineer. And so you're a freshman, you're starting to kind of feel people out and stuff. And at Michigan, you live in the dorm for a year or two, and you know, you kind of move around a little bit, this person, that person. And then now you become a sophomore, and then you decide, well, who are you going to live with? Well, for us, we gathered up our crew, and there was really about a group of 10 or 12 of us that are tight guys, and you can see all of them right here, basically. And we found a house, 6 of us, and so we were figuring out, like, come on, we gotta get Chuck. So we draft Chuck, and Chuck was our crew. And from that point on, Chuck was our man. And we lived together for junior year, and then senior year, and then off we went. Well, right off the bat, we realized, hey, we're not getting enough of each other, even when we're at school. So before our senior year, we decided what we called, sorry for the name, but we called real mans. So we gathered all of us up, and we started in June of 1984. We got together at Chuck's farm, Coleman farm up in Lovington. And the group of us, I think you can see, whatever, 6 of us, and you know, there was an outhouse, I remember, that's what I remember. And so anyways, that started the tradition. And the next year we all graduated, so we didn't do anything that year, we didn't have vacation time. And since that year, and every single year, we've all met together every June. And so this will be our 41st year or 40th year of doing it. And so it's going to be tough for us because right now we were crushed to hear the news, but when we meet together and when Chuck's not there, it is going to be a massive void for us. So anyway, that is and remains a big part of us, and Chuck is an enormous part of that. You know, as I said, when we started out, we were kids learning the world in college, and one of the things we figured out, well, a lot of us really loved music, and Chuck was that guy, one of those guys. Chuck loved going to live events. We were off collecting records and exploring stuff, and then these bands coming into town, and boom, Chuck wanted to go see those guys. He's the only guy I know that went to Burning Man. In sports, you know, we all kind of sports addicts. We love sports, and Chuck loves sports. But Chuck doesn't really love sports the way we love sports. You know, we're talking about whether the Luka trade, or we're talking about you know, who's going to win the Super Bowl. And Chuck's kind of like oldies music sports. He loves sports, but he loves 1980s sports, specifically Detroit 1980s sports. So while we're talking about who might be the best basketball player, Chuck wants to talk about Whittaker and Trammell. And believe me, we're happy to talk about that. You know, as we got older, we started to move into golf. Chuck had no interest in golf. And we would go, come on, Chuck. But we finally discovered that, you know what? We could do scrambles. And scrambles, a game where it's a teamwork game. And Chuck was like, okay, I don't really like golf. It's an individual sport, but get me involved with a team where I can be part of the team and beat these other guys. And he was all in that. And that's kind of the way I think of Chuck is really kind of a core part of our team. Softball player, Chuck, you know, again, core part of our team. He was our third baseman. Chuck was known for his warning track power. Sorry, Chuck. As we would tease him, as he just needs a little more oomph to take it over the fence, we would be that to my brother Tim and hit the long balls. And as I said before, we were kids developing stuff, and as we got older, we would develop and become a different person. And lo and behold, one of those early years, Chuck's like, hey, I'm learning to fly. And then the next year, Chuck's like, hey, by the way, I'm flying in. I have my own plane. I'm flying in. And so, you know, we're like, whoa. And he flies into, I believe it was Monroe Airport was the first one. And so off we went to see his plane, and he took us up to fly. Well, maybe not all of us up flying. There's one person that was a little too nervous to go flying. But anyways, here we are, and he's taking us on loops and showing us 0 Gs and stuff, and oh man, and again, Chuck being a kind of a funny guy, has a legendary line that we repeat over and over and over again: somebody should have had Fruit Loops. Anyway, but one of the constant themes, as you can see, is the University of Michigan, and Chuck loved the University of Michigan, and you know we love the state of Michigan and the University of Michigan, and so for us, it was very easy. Every time there was a big game, or every time we wanted a road trip to see a game, it was always like, hey Chuck, you in? And it was always on end. And so, for example, when we would go out in the fall to go see a game, Chuck would always go. But Chuck would always disappear for like 2 hours. Because, as you all know, Chuck would disappear from time to time. And every single year, he would disappear for 2 hours. And he would spend that time, as was referenced earlier, walking, hiking. And he would just walk around the campus every single year and just see what was new, see what, you know, and he was drawn to that. And so much more, as was referenced, he bought a house. And for us, we're so disappointed because we could see the excitement of this next kind of chapter in life, and how he had developed what he wanted to be and where he wanted to be, and Ann Arbor is, and the University of Michigan was going to be in a huge part of that. But really, the biggest thing you hear about all these accomplishments Chuck has done and all that, and yeah, okay, he does that, but that's not really what Chuck was to us. Chuck was our friend, and we'll remain that way. Thank you.
Chuck, distracted, wandering off by himself at Reno or Oshkosh or Mojave. Yep, our Chuck. After graduating college, Chuck headed off in the car to, and I'm not sure which car it was, a Mustang, a Chevette. I heard a lot of stories yesterday. Chevette with holes in the floor, apparently. Chuck ended up in St. Louis where he got a job at McDonnell Douglas Aircraft Corporation, and he loved to talk about it. That was the heyday when F-15s and all these crazy fighter airplanes were being built. One of the things that he loved while he was at McDonnell was, and he liked to talk about, was the Blue Angels had a special control system in their jets, and he was a big part of helping develop that. So that was a big part of it. He loved to tell me that he was involved in the A-12 that got canceled by Cheney, and he's got parts in his hangar if you want to see them, along with a lot of other parts. He did a lot of stuff at McDonnell Douglas, and he loved every minute of it. And he would tell the new engineers that he knew it was done there when they came and took all the parts off the engineer's desk and basically banned parts from being in engineering. And he didn't think he wanted to be any part of a company that didn't let people take pride in the work and see it on their desk. And so he left. He ended up at a company called Beatty, for those of you aerospace folks. You know Beatty, and you know that it's a little bit notorious. Designed the coolest airplanes on earth, but the guy that ran the company is a little bit of a shyster. But I don't think Chuck had any part of that. And actually, Pete Wilson, I'm going to get you to come start your way up. Sorry, Patrick Wilson. Sorry about that. Patrick worked with me at Beatty. He's going to tell you some stories. But one of the things Chuck did at Beatty was work on the BD-12 and flew its only test flight, I think, after Patrick had left. Maybe Patrick will give you a little bit of insight in that as well. Also worked at Vision Airlines in St. Louis. Also, and I told his folks this, or his brother and sister, the story yesterday, also had a Mustang at some point, but he loved to tell me the transmission exploded in, and so he drove it home backwards. Patrick.
Yeah, Jim was definitely a shyster, but he was a hell of an airplane engineer. Good morning. I'm Patrick Wilson. I'm very honored to be here to speak today about my friend Chuck Coleman. He was truly one of a kind. I met Chuck in 1990 while working on the BD-10 jet, an experimental high-performance two-seater, single-engine, jet-powered airplane. Chuck was honest, humble, caring, and fun to be around, and he was always interested in others. Chuck shared a love for aviation and a passion that went beyond the job. He lived it. Whether we were working on our own airplanes or swapping ideas out in the hangar, he always brought something special to the table. Designing airplanes, he had an instinctive way of looking at things and was always able to keep it simple, light, and it still functioned perfectly. Chuck was a master at building airplanes. He built a Pitts, a Racer, 2 Lancers, all while working at McDonnell Douglas and BD Jet. He'd put in 12 hours, go home, and work another 6. The next morning, he'd be the first one in the parking lot. You name it, he could build it, and with skill that was second to none. I don't know if you knew this about Chuck or not, but he was a very competitive guy. We would catch up every year at Oshkosh, and he was always asking what ratings you have now. He was an A&P mechanic, an engineer, an ATP pilot, a CFI, aerobatic pilot, seaplane pilot, helicopter pilot, and a test pilot, just to name a few. During the BD-10 jet development, we trucked the plane here, Ship 1, to Mojave for the first test flights. Chuck had a Pitts, I had a 2-seater Grumman. They were both about the same speed, same range, and we were both flying them out from St. Louis. I beat him here by 1 day. I said, Chuck, what took you so long? He said his engine wasn't running very smoothly, and he rebuilt 2 of the cylinders in his hotel room. And it only took him an extra day. Would have taken most people another week. He would not have even mentioned it unless you asked him. That's the kind of guy he was. He was a practical guy who drove an old red Mustang that I'm pretty sure he never washed. After we got the plane flying, thanks to Chuck solving some real problems with the plane, he had to completely redesign the tail. I was flying the BD-10 cross country from Spirit St. Louis out to Minden, Nevada for some investors and to start the Reno Air Races. Chuck came along with me. He designed the smoke system and he wanted to make sure that it worked properly. We did a tech stop in Pueblo, Colorado. Right after takeoff, climbing out over the foothills of the mountain, bang, the engine quits. Thought we hit a bird or a catastrophic engine failure. It was a loud bang and you could feel it throughout the entire aircraft. It got real quiet. We were now flying a very fast glider. The first words were from Chuck. He gets on the intercom and he says, "Come on, man, you know what to do." Kind of snapped me out of my surprise moment and disbelief, and we went to work. Lower the nose, best glide. We were able to glide back to the same airport we took off from. After we landed, Chuck took the entire engine bay apart, inspected everything, put it back together, and we were off again flying 2 hours later. Aviation lost one of its best with Chuck. His skill, his enthusiasm, and the ability to work on, design, and fly aircraft with precision, and his knack for bringing a plane to life. Those are the things I'll always remember. As my friend and coworker, he'll be missed more than words can say. Chuck's life was a gift, and he shared it generously with all of us. Thank you, Chuck.
Thank you, Patrick. Sorry, folks, I don't usually speak from notes, so I'm lost. All right. So after St. Louis, so again, he went BD Visionaire, Visionaire. Visionaire was a program that Scaled was working on here in Mojave, and so a bunch of folks, including Doug Shane, got to know Chuck through that, and also through BD doing some flight tests here in Mojave. And so at that point, Chuck decided I need to do something else. Doug Shane approached him and said, "Hey, why don't you come to Scaled? We got some cool projects." And Chuck ended up out here in Mojave. At the time, the two big things we were working on were pretty crazy, frankly. There was a jet called the Capricorn in our inside code name. The world knew it as the Global Flyer, Virgin Atlantic Global Flyer. It was a jet-powered airplane that was going to fly nonstop around the world on a single tank of gas. And so that was a huge deal. And meanwhile, in another bay at Scale, we were also working on a thing called Spaceship One that was going to eventually win the Ansari X Prize for being the first civilian spaceship. So when I met Chuck, I was leading the Spaceship One, and Doug was showing him through the company. And Chuck kind of did, whoa, you know what Chuck does? Wow, Spaceship One, this is, oh, wow. And just kind of like pouring the accolades on for, I don't know, for the parts that were sitting there at the time. But that infectious smile really struck me, and we hit it off. And I think everybody at Scale pretty much was the same way. Kind of hit it off with Chuck and that big smile and those quippy little one-liners and bits that he would do. And so he came to work at Scale. One of the earliest memories I remember. So Doug brought him in partly to train as a test pilot and partly to train the new, what were going to be the spaceship pilots. So he basically took all of the flight test pilots at the time. So I think Doug, John Carco, Mike Melville, I can't remember who else. Anyways, all the test pilots. And I don't know what he told them, but I remember watching Chuck go out with the pilots, and then I remember watching the hero pilots come back, and every single one of those guys that got in the airplane in a pickle suit with Chuck went off, came back, got out squeamishly, white as a sheet, all of them, including Mike Melville, which is shocking, squeamishly kind of went off behind the building, entered, and who knows, I didn't check the legs. Those of you that are pilots know in the leg right here is where you keep your barf bag. So you can still kind of walk as a hero back to the building. Every one of those guys was sick. Every one of those guys got run through the ringer. But the point was, Chuck developed a profile that he could go train spaceship pilots to experience whatever they might encounter. That involved positive G, big turns, lots of G, negative G, tumbling, all this stuff. So all those guys that started out day one, probably humbled and sick, very sick. By the end of that, could go out and do whatever they needed to in the extra 300 and wouldn't be sick. So that was a big thing I remember. Another job Chuck got, which he was very proud of, was that we would take this box. So spaceship was very unique. You can't go buy avionics to give the pilot information to turn it and go to space. You had to build that from scratch. So one of Chuck's jobs was to take that box, fold it in his extra 300, and then go abuse the snot out of it. So his job was to go tumble and pull G's and do all kinds of things, and he was very proud to come back and have beat the machine. And because of him, that machine eventually was, and the team obviously was very good, very reliable piece of hardware that obviously helped us win the X Prize. He also, probably one of his biggest things at scale was being the guy who was in charge of the flight control, the fuel system on the Global Flyer. That team was very small. About, what was it, 5 people, I think? Very small team of engineers. Every one of those people was very highly talented and very empowered to just take a big chunk of this crazy airplane and get it done. And it was obviously successful. They flew around the world nonstop. And again, broke a bunch of records. So again, that's the gee whiz stuff, but I need to tell a few stories about the funny stuff. Did you know, friends, family, that Chuck's first movie appearance was in a movie originally called Cockfight? I kid you not, I looked it up the other day. Later renamed it Round and Round. I wonder why they did that. In it, Chuck played Agent Becky Lord. I'll say that again, Agent Becky Lord. A female FBI agent who was a little high-strung, and so to relieve stress, she would go tumble her personal extra 300 around to unwind. So this is a question for everybody to ponder, and maybe some of you know the answer. Is that the only time Chuck wore a wig? I'm gonna guess yes. So of course, as we do as his friends, as soon as we found out about this, and I don't know how we found out, I can't imagine he told us, we held a party over at our house where Chuck would narrate like the special edition of the video, but you know, Chuck's quippy comments. The other thing was at that time, if you guys remember, there was this party game that you would play called something like Degrees of Separation from Kevin Bacon. The theory goes, Kevin Bacon was in so many movies, you could name any person Tom Cruise, and you could figure out how many degrees of separation to other people Tom Cruise was from Kevin Bacon. Like he was in this movie with so-and-so, and that person was in that movie with so-and-so. Chuck was very proud that he was 2 degrees of separation from Kevin Bacon. Because in that movie called Cockfight, Round and Round, he was in it with Wilford Brimley, who was in the line with Kevin Bacon. True story. Also, anybody in Mojave knows him, and I don't know if this oozed out in the rest of his friends groups, but for several years, Chuck was the arbiter of irony. You guys remember this? You would come to Chuck and he would shoot down your irony as not being an actual irony based on all these facts and logic. It would usually devolve into a digression and discussion, a dissertation on Alanis Morissette's song about irony, where he would tell you why none of it was irony. There's a guy, I don't think he's here, who's named Brandon, who was in our lunch group. And Chuck used to point out that this kid a lot of times used dubious facts. And so he coined the term embranding the facts, which remains to this day. This is my favorite story. I saw one kid in the room back there. Is that your kid, John? You gotta plug his ears. You gotta be official. Apologize for anybody who doesn't like curse words. A couple funny things I saw, but one day, again, the standard lunch group was out at Carl's eating lunch. Mojave, if you noticed on the way in, is a little rough. Not to offend anybody here, but we all kind of know it's a rough place. I think of it as the stop off for the snowboarders to pee on the way to Mammoth. And that's kind of what everybody at the restaurants thinks. So Chuck, very proper, barely heard him cuss in my whole life. We were sitting at a table eating our greasy cheeseburgers. The group next to us, some guy leaned over and said, "Are you guys from around here?" Chuck says, without skipping a beat, "Hell no, this place is a shithole. We're going snowboarding." True story. And this may not be as funny, but it was funny to us because it's so Chuck. Chuck decided to leave his Mountain Dew that he would drink non-stop at that time in the door of his Beamer that was black on a Mojave day when it was probably 110. So it was probably 200 degrees in his car. So we get in, We were in the back, Chuck hops in the front, and leaned over for some reason and touched the can. That was enough to overpressure it, and it exploded. The funny part was that Chuck, dancing around, wiping this stuff off, saying, "I can't believe we live in a world where," it was just, it made no sense. And you could tell he knew it was him that caused this damage. But yeah, seeing Chuck dance around with Mountain Dew was amazing. So that was kind of the early years. There's many people in here in the room who could tell early years of Mojave stories, and I encourage you to do so at the end when we kind of open it up. At this point though, I'm gonna hop over to the air shows. Now, Chuck technically started flying air shows, I think even back in St. Louis. His mother and sister were telling me yesterday, I believe, tell me if I get the story right, but he actually flew his first air show, didn't tell his mom. He may not even told you he was on the team. So, so he went and flew his first air show and mentioned to his sister, you know, should I tell mom? Yeah, I think you probably ought to let her know. So he started flying air shows with Toyota. We were going to have Sean Tucker here today, and he still may show up really late, but Sean Tucker needs no introduction to anybody in aerospace. He is a legend. He was a good friend of Chuck's. Chuck flew a bunch of his airplanes. Sean was just a great guy. He wanted to speak today. He actually got stuck in Texas. I'm going to give you a little quick thing from him. I've been stuck in Texas all day. It was impossible to go anywhere because of 40 or 50 mile an hour winds. I think we can all relate. It's probably what's going on here. I'm planning to depart at sunrise, but I don't think I can make it before Chuck's celebration is concluded. I'm heartbroken because I love Chuck and was honored to have had him in my life. But I know Chuck would not have wanted me to be a dumbass and push the envelope beyond the scope of my abilities just to participate in his memorial service. So that's from him. In aerospace, we have a phrase that we like, what do you call it, a little thing, time to spare, go by air. I think today applies. Obviously, we didn't expect snow and all this. I'm going to read the words that were in the IAC article. Most of us probably don't have access to the International Aerobatic Club magazine. The IAC is saddened by the news that Charles Chuck Coleman, a prolific aerobatic aviator, aerospace engineer, and experimental test pilot, passed away on October 20th, 2024. Coleman has been a member of the IAC since January 1st, 1987. He accumulated over 10,500 hours in total time during his lifetime, with more than 4,300 hours and an extra 300. That's astonishing for those of you that aren't pilots. That is a lot of time. He's performed hundreds of air shows and gave 3,000 plus rides. 3,000 rides. It's amazing. He's known as a kind and extremely generous person. He was a flight instructor and very giving of his time and resources. In a Kate Fox 14 interview by Ariana Pera, a friend of Coleman's, he stated, the quality of Chuck's that stands out the most was just how generous he was with the resources he had. He also stated he got to work on just a ton of fascinating things. One of the most memorable being recruited to be the flight instructor for actors like Miles Teller in the movie Top Gun Maverick. That was something he really got a kick out of, his friend stated. Just giving them their first experience before they went off to film the movie. When asked about Coleman's legacy, his friend said, he was loved and respected by so many and had an enormous friend group. He's going to be very, very, very sorely missed. And we can all relate. So now I'm going to take a little bit of a turn. The aerobatic air shows and all that stuff happened. But again, amongst most of us new and close, we knew two Chucks. We knew Chuck 1.0, and like a software rebuild, we knew Chuck 2.0. This might get tough. Dig deep. In August of 2008, the Scaled Engineering Lunch Group had just gotten back from eating some terrible, and I mean terrible, greasy food in Mojave, as we did. We went back to work, but Chuck had an air show coming up that weekend, and so he went out to practice. We all know the story. Something went terribly wrong, but 3 miracles occurred that day. I think, best we know, he was headed downhill and somehow righted the airplane and hit the ground flat, so he wasn't upside down. That was miracle number 1. Number 2, and this one is astonishing, and it has to be a miracle. There was a medevac helicopter hovering ready to go on a mission in the middle of the field. And not only that they were ready to respond to something, but there was a medevac in the back, or a EMT in the back seat who was actually watching Chuck practice for the air show. And so they saw it happen, and so immediately within 2 minutes they were on scene. And then miracle number 3. Little known to most of us, when they picked him up and hauled him to the best, closest airport or hospital over in Bakersfield, that was one of the best medical trauma centers for brain injury in the country. And so for many weeks, days, weeks, hours, months, Chuck was in recovery over in Bakersfield. That was, I know, very hard and painful for him, and very hard and painful for his friends. But the cool thing was this group. So many of the faces in this room I recognize because his friends and people in his life, his family, rallied around him, and he was under nearly constant vigil for months. And so when the doctor would say something that pissed off people, those friends and those family would rally behind Chuck and stick up for him. Through the love of those friends, Chuck not only recovered, but he thrived. The doctors, as you can imagine, said, never, you'll be lucky to talk, walk, drive, whatever, never fly again. And obviously, he didn't believe in that and did all those things. So why do we call him Chuck 2.0? I think in most ways, after time, you know, the kind of misplaced words and weird things about Chuck, most of those went away. He, I would say, pretty much fully recovered, but he was different. There were slightly different things, and we all saw him. A lot of people knew him after the fact, just like, oh, he's a quirky dude. Those of us that knew both sides of him were like, oh, yeah, that's the difference between 1.0 and 2.0. And we could, close friends could kind of joke about the 1.0 and 2.0 thing with him. He would kind of get a kick out of it. But I think there were two kind of major things about Chuck that changed because of that accident that I really personally believe I saw. Number one, that is he didn't take the fact that he'd been given a second chance for granted. I really think the adventures, the rides, the aerobatics, all that stuff that was taken away from him so rapidly, if anything, increased. He was much more adventurous and going all over the place after that. And number two is I really believe he started leaning heavily into giving back to friends and to people who want to see rides and showing people that love of flight that he had from a first-hand experience. So Chuck 2.0 took advantage. So I could stand up here and ramble for hours about all the great things he did after that fact, but I want to bring up 3 folks. I'll start with Eric Lassen, who was a friend of Chuck's after he had his accident, maybe before too, he could tell you. And Chuck worked with Eric at Scale. Eric was on the rocket motor team, did a bunch of stuff, been friends with Chuck for a long time, so Eric.
I got to start my discussion with the first thing that I learned about Chuck is he wanted to know where I was from and where I grew up, and it was really important that I came from a good family and good stock. For some reason, that was super important to him. And when he found out that I grew up in Southern California, he couldn't believe it, because California, if you don't know Chuck, he loved to dump on California. And how it's the worst place in the world, it's so liberal, it's full of granola, fruits, nuts, and flakes. His words. So after we got through the whole part that I grew up in California, and we decided that we could be friends, he had a little bit in this 2.0 era of a abrasive personality challenge, where if he didn't like the way something was going at work, he would not be shy and he would let you know. A number of people didn't really care for that part of his personality and would kind of start to exclude him a little bit. But the thing that I found about Chuck is that he was so incredibly generous for the people that would endure his quips, his sarcasm, and in his way, I felt like it was him sharing his love, even though it sometimes came with a little bit of a lecture, a little bit of a soapbox, and a little bit of a preach. So I got to work on the rocket motor, and it was him coming back to work. And his first assignment was to actually build or design the structure that would hold the motor case in the back of Spaceship 2. And we were out in the desert on a July hot day. Second time we were doing what's called a cold flow test, and the test didn't go well. And a handful of people were injured and killed. Chuck actually was severely injured himself, taking probably about 13 or 14 carbon fiber shards to the face. Looked like a porcupine, and his bell was super well rung, and he just kind of wandered out in the desert for about 20 minutes as he recovered from the shell shock that came from the explosion. He ended up being in the hospital for a couple of days, and I really got to know him kind of through that experience, just watching him recover, and he was so worried about the other guys that got hurt and injured, much more than about himself and about what he was suffering through. So it was quite an experience personally to kind of see him be so caring. He had previously, only a year or two before, recovered from his own, bad day, and it was really tender to watch him kind of care and worry about visiting those in the hospital that were recovering. So I really saw a side of Chuck that I don't think you can pick up on when you just work with somebody, but he really did have a huge heart, and he really was a caring person. One of the things that really struck me out about Chuck is that if you know him, he's extremely frugal, and another way of saying that is stingy ass jerk. The first couple times we went to Denny's together, he loved Denny's here in Mojave. It was his kind of go-to jam, and he'd love to get the $2 like pancakes, super cheap breakfast. And I was like, hey, we go out to eat a lot. Let's just like try to trade meals. It's kind of a pain in the butt to split the bill. And he's like, I only spend $3 and you spend like $8. We've got to pay. So I was like, okay, this is kind of funny. But that stinginess and that, I'm going to call it the art of the bro deal, actually is something that turned out to be something that was super endearing about Chuck. One of the things that he was trying to do after his accident, it took him a long time to get back into being able to fly. He struggled to get his medical reinstated after his closed head injury and worked for a number of years to try and get it reinstated. And at the time, he was living with Paul Waldmiller, and we know and love him, and they were close friends. And I was a young engineer, one income, had a couple of kids, and I dreamed of flying and always wanted to fly, always topped airplanes, working in scale composites, watching all the other single guys getting their pilot's license. And Chuck came to me and he said, hey, I saw that you made a website for your old college club. Like, how good are you doing a website? And I said, oh, I can make one. It's not going to be great, but I can put one together. He says, how about I trade you a website for my air show performances for your flight instruction? Bob Waldmiller provided the plane. Chuck provided the time. And he was, I believe, I don't know if anybody can correct me on this, I think I'm the only student that he had that went from 0 all the way to the check ride with Chuck. So a fun story about that is when we got to the check ride, the examiner in Bakersfield is a wonderful lady named Donna, who's she's known to be super strict. She interviewed Chuck before she interviewed me about taking the check ride. And she says, well, how many students have you put through the check ride process? And he's like, oh, this is actually the first one that I've done all the way through. And she said, would you like to sit in the back seat? And I was like kind of getting nervous because I already don't want to do the check ride, and Chuck has strong opinions about the right and wrong way to do things, especially on how to fly safely. And she said, Eric, do you mind if he sits in the back seat? He's going to learn from you going through your check ride and kind of be able to like go through this experience with you. And I said, I don't mind, but I did mind. And unfortunately, as I went through the check ride, one of the hardest things is that she would ask me a question, and I could hear Chuck in the headset go, and I, like, more than anything else that was stressing me out in the check ride was the fact that I could hear Chuck doing his like, I got out of the check ride super stressed. I thought I had failed a couple of times. She went over and talked to Chuck privately and then came back to me. And then she said, congratulations, you got your license. And she took a picture with both of us. And it was a super awesome, rewarding day to kind of go through the emotional roller coaster of enduring a check ride, hearing Chuck get disappointed at me, and then ultimately passing. I think the other thing that I want to say is I don't know that Chuck does partnerships super well. Like, he's got strong opinions about how to do things. And after we got my pilot's license, I was excited to try to build hours any way that I could. I wanted to start working on my A&P license. He was a licensed IA. He was willing to teach and train anybody who was willing to kind of just help out and pitch in. So we ended up buying a Cessna 172 together out of Big Bear. Nobody wanted this plane because it was mustard yellow. My wife was convinced that I was going to die in it, so she nicknamed it Colonel Mustard from the game Clue, because that's like the murder weapon that takes you out. And Chuck and I went on to like share that airplane as a partnership for 13 years. And it was a wonderful relationship where we did lots of annuals together. I didn't realize it at the time, but Chuck, the art of the bro deal, knew that I wanted to fly as much as possible, that I do all the maintenance, and he would just get to like walk in like a rock star, sign it off, and then like use the airplane at his convenience. To this day, I think he flew it to Burning Man 3 times, Bob, is that right? It still has that damn talc in the back seat and all the carpet. It goes from taking the plane to Burning Man, and I still blame him for the fact that I'm never gonna get it cleaned out. But the real advantage for him that actually turned out is that he needed ferry rides all the time because of all of his air show work. And I don't think I've ever paid for a BFR, and I don't think it's always been, I'll buy you dinner and I'll fly in somewhere that he needed to get a one-way drop. And so we had a lot of time flying together, and it was a wonderful relationship to spend over the last 15 years being his close friend. Spent a lot of time here in the hangar late at night, rebuilding airplane motors, flying to random shops. I've been to airports all over the Western United States, dropping them off. I am gonna say that one of the worst things that's ever happened to me is the fact that he got to participate in the Top Gun deal, because all I got to hear every time after that was how amazing it was to fly with Tom Cruise, and how Top Gun's the best movie that's ever been made, and he can't wait to be in the next one. As I remember Chuck and think about the things that really stand out, I really think that the part that really affects me the most is truly how I got to be his ground crew at the Salinas Air Show just 2 years ago, and how much he loved to have little kids run up to him and look at his airplane and look at him as the big, awesome air show pilot that he was, and he would just stay there next to the airplane and wait until every kid got a picture, everybody got to touch the airplane. He let a ton of them sit. When I look at the smiles and the joy that come from people who want to experience the aerobatic first-time ride, there was nobody better than Chuck Coleman in giving that introduction. I love you, Chuck. I miss you, and I'm glad to remember him.
Thanks, Eric. So Chuck spent a lot of time going to Oshkosh, so I'm going to grab Craig Spearco and have him come up. He's a friend that I believe met Chuck during the Spaceship One program. Spent a lot of time going on adventures with Chuck, so we'll go through that. I also forgot to mention, when Chuck was at Scale, one of the big, huge things he did, and he loved these guys, was spending a ton of time with Michelle Sailing, Mike Allsbury's co-pilot, and Mike Melville. Sally Melville's in the back. Spent a ton of time with Mike Melville and Proteus. He's probably got more time above 50,000 feet than most people on the Earth, frankly. Craig, I'm going to bring you up.
Good morning. I got to experience Chuck 2.0. He was incredibly generous. I was here during the Spaceship One X Prize win, but not with Chuck. I was here with Richard Branson because I work in Hollywood, and when I met Chuck, he was really excited about meeting someone who worked in Hollywood, and I was really excited about a guy who made airplanes with his bare hands. So I actually met him here at one of these Saturday fly-ins, and is Kathy here? Oh, hey Kathy. And I guess I'll start my story with that, and I'll end it with another fly-in with Kathy at the end. So I always felt we were good friends because he wanted some of the life I was leading, and I wanted some of the life he was leading. So when he heard I was directing a television show at Billy Richards' Skydive Ranch in New York, he paid his own way to go there to help out. I think he wanted to see how it was done. And then when he asked me for favors, they were really the best times of my life. He got me flying test flights for Burt Rutan and for Icon. And I'm like, that's a favor for you? No, that's a favor for me to be able to experience that. So one of the things he did for me was I wrote this movie about a New York City kid who learns about life from his grandfather who flew tail draggers off of a grass strip in the Midwest. And I did get a big studio to pay for it, but one year when we were at Oshkosh, he said, we got to go on a road trip, and we ended up at his father's farm, and I realized the reason he brought me there was because it was the perfect location for this movie that he helped me write. And then I was like, but Chuck, it needs to have a grass strip. This isn't going to work. Turns out he'd already started the permitting process to put a grass strip on the field. And then I'll just end it with, so Kathy had this other experience where it was a flower bombing contest here at Mojave. And Chuck and I thought, oh, this is a goof, this will be great fun. And we did that. And when Janet was looking through his papers, turns out he had saved the certificate and it said we came in third, which I'm not really sure how that happened because there was only one other plane in the competition. There was this kid and his father who flew in their old tail dragger, and I guess he just made sure that the kid had a great time and that he won the prize. And that's how generous my friend Chuck was in this year's track.
Thanks, Craig. So we all know about the Top Gun thing. And I'll have Courtney, if you could come up. So Chuck, I think in a lot of ways really idolized Tom Cruise. Similar ages. I think like most of us who were youngish when Top Gun came out, that really made a huge impact on our life. So I think Chuck resonated with Tom Cruise, and I think that place had a huge meaning to him. And so later in life, when he got the opportunity to train the pilots, that was a pretty big thing, and as Eric mentioned, you heard about it all the time. Courtney was in charge of the program to train the people that sat in the back seat during all the filming so they wouldn't puke all over the cameras. That's the reality of a lot of television.
The first day I met Chuck Coleman, he gave me a copy of Stick and Rudder. And I don't think that's actually that surprising. I think the surprising thing is that I actually read it, and I still have it. It's not the most scintillating book on aviation, but it's very informative. I had the honor of working with Chuck on Top Gun Maverick, and that movie could not have happened without him. He trained the 7 main actors in his Extra 300, and I think most of them did about 30 hours with Chuck in the plane. So he was basically getting the actors acclimated to the Gs and the maneuvers they would face in the jet. We would meet every week in Van Nuys, and he would fly 3 sorties a day, and he was not tired at all. They would inevitably throw up every time, but Chuck was not bothered. I think the best part was that he always had the best playlists as well. It was a lot of 80s music, and then he would come back and quiz us on all the 80s music trivia he knew, and we got it wrong every time because we were not alive in the 80s. I went back and read some of the flight training summaries, and the overall theme was this. Chuck was so proud of each of them for their own unique abilities, and he was never discouraging. He was always so patient with them, even when they wouldn't get it or would do something wrong in the plane. He invested so much in each of the students and was an incredible teacher, and I think that will live on forever. As we know, Chuck was obsessed with flying. It was his favorite thing in the world, and that extra was like an extension of himself. His passion for aviation was contagious. You couldn't help but get on board. I think Chuck would have said the absolute highlight of working on Top Gun was when he got to give the one and only Tom Cruise a ride in his extra. Tom's plane was down for maintenance, so he couldn't make it to set. And I gave Chuck a very, very early morning phone call and asked if he could help. And I think Chuck ran to the FBO. I made it in time just to see Chuck and Tom take off. And I think that was probably one of the coolest moments of his life. He would not stop talking about it afterward. Chuck didn't just care about flying, he cared about people, he cared about what you liked, what you didn't like, and he always remembered. He wanted to know what you were passionate about, so he could care about it too. My sister's an F-15 pilot, and I connected them so they could meet at Oshkosh. And I know they talk nonstop about aviation in terms I probably don't understand at all, but I wish I could have been there. He sent me a picture of my sister talking to a high school student, and I think they recruited that kid to basically become an aviator that day, so it was pretty special. My sister also sent me a video later that night, and all the aviators were sitting on their planes watching the most insane fireworks display I've ever seen. And so that's how I'll choose to envision Chuck. Standing by his plane, surrounded by friends, and watching the sky.
So we're getting up to the current time. So the last few years, Chuck has been a big part of the airport, as I mentioned before, scooting around. But one of the big things he did as far as giving back is he was actually sitting on the airport board. So I'm going to have Dr. David Smith, call sign Jester, is that right? That's right. And I believe Jester was in Top Gun too, right? There you go, Iron Man. Dr. David Smith runs the airfield here. Worked with Chuck closely, and so I'm going to have him say a few words about the last few years here in Mojave.
So it's a little different for me to be here. I didn't know Chuck long, but he absolutely had an impact on my life and an impact on this mission. So it's who I get to represent today. I get to represent a remarkable staff that does the day-to-day work at Mojave Air and Spaceport. A tremendous board of directors that provides the guidance and direction. Chuck was part of that board of directors. And the 3,000 or so mission partners here at Mojave that one way or another all benefit from Chuck's legacy here. So, although I don't often work from script, this needs to be read verbatim. The board felt very strongly about Chuck and wanted a resolution published honoring Charles Chuck Coleman. Whereas it is with profound sorrow that we recognize the passing of Director Charles Chuck Coleman, a fearless aviator leader and an integral member of our community, and whereas Chuck Coleman, born June 26, 1963 in St. John's, Michigan, lived a remarkable life in the world of aviation as an aerospace engineer, ATP pilot, flight instructor, flight test pilot, business owner, acrobatics flight instructor for the Top Gun movie Maverick, and chase instructor pilot for Global Flyer, White Knight 1, and Spaceship 1. And whereas his daring spirit was evident in his role as test pilot for Scaled Composites, BD Jet Corporation, Icon Aircraft, and flight-tested aircraft such as Proteus Jet, DD-10 Jet, BD-12, Icon A5, Light Sports Amphibious Airplane, and his airshow performances. And whereas his illustrious career also included service as a senior design engineer for McDonnell Douglas on a range of military aircraft such as the F-15, F-18, AV-8B, YF-23, C-17, and A-12, and whereas Chuck Coleman's impact on the aerospace industry and his contributions to the advancement of aviation technology will be felt for many generations, serving as a testament to his enduring legacy of courage, innovation, and resilience. Therefore, be it resolved that we at Mojave Air and Spaceport at Rutan Field extend our deepest condolences to the family, friends, and colleagues of Chuck Coleman and honor his life, his achievements, and his enduring legacy with profound gratitude and admiration. Be it further resolved that this resolution be inscribed in the records of the district and a copy be presented to the family of Chuck Coleman as a token of our heartfelt sympathy and respect. Carrie, would you please present the plaque? A plaque in Chuck Coleman's honor will also be entered into Legacy Park with the far too many aviators that have fallen from the sky, serving this mission at Mojave. The highlights of what's on this, I invite you all to read. It'll be permanently presented at Legacy Park where you can see it at any time, or here available on stage as we take a break. All the various achievements in here have been well documented and talked about today, and I won't reiterate more than just a few of them. An aerospace engineer, an ATP pilot, a flight instructor, a test pilot, an air show performer, and an A&P mechanic. More than 4,300 hours in his extra 300. Hundreds of air shows, 3,000 acro rides. Part of 2 Collier Award-winning projects. The Collier Award is the #1 achievement in aviation in a year. It is extremely rare that anyone be part of 1 Collier project. Be part of 2 is absolutely astronomical. Member of the Screen Actors Guild, worked with Tom Cruise, you just heard about that, but his passion about flight and his STEM education and wanted to carry that over to the children of our community is really landmark. Over 20 years here at the Mojave Air and Spaceport, and a key member of our board of directors when he fell. I think we don't get it. So I invite you to come and take a look at that plaque in detail and visit our Legacy Park and a little part of Chuck that will sit behind. I'll simply sadly say I'm not another nickel. Chuck, I miss you.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. All right, now we're going to do something a little unique. Pilots know this tradition, but I'm going to have you all head outside. And I think we're going to head, I'm looking for airport people, which doors we're going out? Back, my left, back corner to your left. We'll go out there for a couple minutes, do a little tradition, and then we're going to come back in, and I'll talk to you when we get back in.